The house leaned into the wind like a weary confession. Every broken shutter, every sigh of the floorboards seemed to remember something better, something that no longer dared return. The swamp beyond the porch pulsed with a soft hum, like breath caught between prayer and silence. Moonlight dripped through the cracked window panes, painting the dust in silver grief. Inside, the air was swollen with stillness, the kind that holds its breath just before truth walks in. Detective Elias Rourke stood by the threshold, his reflection trembling faintly in a puddle of rainwater. He had been here before, decades ago, when laughter still haunted these walls and the scent of magnolia hid the decay underneath. Tonight, the scent was rot and rusted memory. His fingers brushed the wallpaper, peeling, soft with damp, and beneath it faint outlines of childish drawings emerged. A son, a name, Clara. The silence wasn't empty, it was listening. Outside, cicadas screamed like broken clocks. Rourke adjusted his collar, but the air refused to move. His flashlight wavered over the remnants of life abandoned, a porcelain shoe, a cracked mirror, a photograph of a girl smiling beneath a summer sky that hadn't aged as she had not lived to. It was 1986 all over again, Louisiana, the summer she vanished. The girl they never found, the girl who had once called him Uncle Eli. And now, 39 years later, her name had returned to him like a ghost demanding penance. 2. Old disappearance resurfaces after discovery of symbolic object. It began with a trinket, a charm bracelet unearthed in a dried-up stretch of the bayou, found by a boy skipping stones, tangled in the reeds like something waiting to be remembered. The brass was dulled, but the tiny charm still whispered stories. A ballerina, a heart, a letter C, the same bracelet Clara Duval wore on the day she vanished. The one Elias had given her for her 12th birthday. When the sheriff's office called, Rourke didn't answer at first. He just stared at the phone, at the name flashing on the screen as if sound itself might drag him backward in time. When he finally picked up, he heard his own pulse louder than the voice on the line. "We found something, Eli. You might want to see it yourself." The drive out was slow, the fog thick as thought. Pines loomed over the narrow road, their silhouettes bending like penitents. Every curve brought back fragments, the missing posters, the press flashes, her mother's face collapsing in disbelief. He had buried it all beneath years of cases, bottles, and excuses, but memory has a cruel patience. The bracelet sat on a white cloth under the glare of halogen lamps. Even through gloves, he swore he felt warmth. He turned it gently, and the faint inscription inside the clasp caught his eye. "To my little light." His handwriting. A sound escaped him, something between a breath and a prayer. "She didn't deserve this," he whispered. The deputy beside him didn't reply. There was nothing to say. Later, alone in his car, he turned the bracelet in his palm until dawn bled through the mist. The past wasn't calling anymore. It was coming. 3. Investigator shows personal involvement, mixing duty with obsession. The reopening of Clara's case became Rourke's silent undoing. Officially, he was just assisting, an aging detective lending context to a forgotten file. Unofficially, it was a confession long overdue. He spent nights in the archive room, dust blooming around him like pale ghosts. Each report was a wound reopened. Testimonies, theories, the unending chorus of what-ifs. Her father had blamed the swamp, her mother had blamed God and Elias. He had blamed himself. He had promised to walk her home that evening, but promises rot when left in the dark. Colleagues noticed the change. The way he avoided eye contact, the way his fingers trembled when he spoke her name. "You don't owe her anything more," one said, "but guilt doesn't fade, it ferments." Sometimes he heard her voice, not in the air but beneath it, threaded through the hum of the ceiling fan or the hiss of the tape recorder. "Uncle Eli, Are you still looking? He began visiting the house nightly, parking by the dirt road, flashlight off, watching the place breathe through its cracks as if the walls themselves remembered him. He swore he saw her silhouette once, framed in the window, but when he stepped closer, the reflection staring back was only his own, older, hollow, and afraid of what he might finally remember. The lines between investigator and mourner blurred until they vanished. The case file wasn't just a record anymore, it was scripture, and he was its last believer. Clara's mother, Miriam Duval, still lived 3 miles from the house in a trailer lined with rosaries and yellowed photographs. Her eyes were cloudy but sharp, the kind that saw through lies and pity alike. When Rourke visited, she didn't rise to greet him. She just said, "You took long enough," and turned back to the window where the swamp glimmered like a living thing. He tried to speak, but words stuck to his throat like cobwebs. "She would have been 41 this year," Miriam said. "Did you ever think she'd forgive you?" Rourke looked at the crucifix on the wall, its face half swallowed by shadow. "Forgiveness isn't what I came for." Outside, the cicadas had gone quiet. Even the wind seemed to wait. Then there was Sheriff Nolan Price, younger, clean-cut, full of statistics and procedure. He didn't understand ghosts, only evidence. To him, Rourke was an echo of the past, sentimental and in the way. "You're too close to this," Nolan warned one night, flipping through the new evidence. "You see patterns because you need to." Maybe he was right. But Elias knew the case's pulse wasn't in the files. It beat in the spaces between what was said and what was buried. And then there was Grace LeBlanc, Clara's childhood friend, now a nurse in the same town, who came forward when the news broke. She remembered the nights before Clara disappeared, the phone calls, the arguments. "She said she'd found something," Grace whispered. "Something she wasn't supposed to." Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't. "She told me she'd tell you, Eli, that night." The air between them thickened, grief sharpening into revelation. Rourke turned away before she could see his face, because in that moment he realized he hadn't forgotten what she meant. He had just refused to remember. 5. Symbolic clues, photos, diary, patterns build intellectual intrigue. The diary surfaced weeks later, hidden in the false back of Clara's music box. The pages were soft with mildew, the ink faded but stubborn like the memory itself. She had written about the house, the voices she heard in the walls, the light that flickered at 3 a.m., the way the air felt alive. But there was more. A repeated phrase scrawled in different inks, different moods. "He watches me from the water." Rourke read the line again and again, until the words blurred into shapes. He thought of the swamp, the reflection of lanterns on the bayou, how sometimes one could see a face that wasn't their own. In her final entry, Clara had drawn a pattern, a spiral of eyes, small and uneven, circling a single word, E. He told himself it meant evil. He told himself it didn't mean Elias. The photos followed, snapshots from her disposable camera recovered in a sealed evidence bag. Most were ordinary schoolyard friends, her dog, but the last frame was overexposed, distorted. Through the whitened blur, faint outlines appeared. The porch, a man's shadow, and what looked like a hand reaching toward her shoulder. Rourke's hand trembled as he pinned it to the board. The room around him seemed to contract, closing in with the rhythm of his pulse. The whisper in the back of his mind, softer now, almost kind, "You were there." He began to dream of water, of laughter muffled beneath it, of bracelets gleaming like lures in the dark. When he woke, his throat burned with the taste of the bayou. 6. Twist questions investigators' perception, blurring truth and delusion. The confession came not from evidence, but from memory. A storm swept through the parish the night before the arrest. Rain clawed at the windows of Rourke's office, lightning flaring over the case board like the flash of a camera. He sat alone, surrounded by faces and fragments of time. Somewhere between waking and fever, the past opened its mouth and spoke. He was back in 1986, driving Clara home. She'd found something, letters hidden in her father's study, proof of a debt unpaid, names whispered in fear. She had wanted to tell her mother. Elias had told her not to. "It's not your burden, kiddo," he'd said, pulling over by the marsh. She had gotten out of the car, angry, her bracelet catching the light. He remembered shouting after her, the mud swallowing his shoes, the storm brewing on the horizon. He remembered her slipping, her small hand reaching for him, and the moment he hesitated. Just one breath, one blink too long. By the time he reached her, the water had gone still. He hadn't murdered her, but he hadn't saved her either. The guilt had rewritten itself as mystery, his mind constructing the case as penance. He had buried the truth so deeply that even he had believed the lie, that someone else had done it, that she had vanished into something unspeakable. But the monster was memory. The crime was omission. When the sheriff came knocking, evidence in hand, Rourke didn't resist. He just nodded, eyes on the floor. "You were right," he said softly. "I saw patterns because I needed to." The bracelet, the diary, the spiral, it all pointed back to him, not as the killer but as the coward. 7. Ending feels haunting and unresolved. Truth brings no peace. The press called it closure. The town called it justice. But in the quiet hours before dawn, the swamp whispered a different story. Rourke sat in the empty interrogation room, its single bulb swaying gently overhead. The air smelled of bleach and memory. He turned the bracelet one last time in his palm, its metal now cold, lifeless. Somewhere the storm was dying out, leaving the earth raw and washed clean. But inside him, the rain never stopped. Through the glass he saw Miriam Duval watching. Her face unreadable, her hand trembling as she pressed something against the pane. A photograph of Clara, age 12, smiling with her eyes half closed, light caught in her hair. Rourke nodded once, as if in prayer. He whispered, "I found you." But the truth didn't bring her back. It only hollowed the space she once filled. When they took him away, the light flickered. The same hour it always had in her diary, the same breath between guilt and silence. The bayou hummed outside, endless, patient. And somewhere in that drowning quiet, a child's laughter rippled faintly across the water, fading, echoing, forgiving nothing. The case was solved. The silence remained.